인재 유치에 대해서는 다른 유럽이나 일본에서도 지역에서 어떤 전략을 가지고 있는가에 대해서 혹시 답변해 주실 분이 있으면은 주구에 답변을 해주시면 감사하겠습니다. 다음으로 던포드 교수님 답변 부탁드리겠습니다.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much indeed for the spoken and also for the written comments and questions. At the centre, right, of regional development, almost everywhere in the world, have been essentially two processes. One is industrialization, and another is urbanization. One of the things that is distinct about China is the speed and scale with which those two processes have been occurring. What the Chinese experience shows is the centrality of governance capacity. And I think the experience of other East Asian economies shows exactly the same thing. In the Chinese case, it's distinct in that the Chinese institutional configuration is sui generis. It's a unique institutional configuration. And I agree, that institutional configuration cannot be exported to other parts of the world. I also try to argue that demand is a key driver of regional development. And people are not going to produce goods and services unless they're able to sell them. So in a sense, the absence of markets, the absence of sufficiently large markets is a serious constraint on economic growth. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to stress the importance of the Calgary model, because the Calgary model emphasizes the importance of demand. And demand can, of course, be the demand for exports, and for many regional economies, exports are indeed quite important. But I also pointed out that the residential economy, which is in part consumption demand, is also an important driver of development. But what I was really trying to emphasize most of all is that behind demand, behind exports, behind consumption is investment. To me, investment is exceptionally important because it builds capacity and it's a mechanism through which productivity is increased. So investment demand has played a very, very critical role in explaining China's sustained growth. It also explained the sustained growth of Korea, Taiwan, many other countries, Japan, when they went through these processes of catch-up. In some cases, sort of leapfrog development. Today, in economies that face slow rates of growth, even extremely low rates of interest are not capable of stimulating enough profit-motivated investment to absorb and recycle the savings that people want to make. So we're in a situation where there's a large gap between productive investment and savings. So one of the things that I was trying to do in my talk is identify the ways in which one could actually identify productive investments, right, that potentially can absorb the savings, right, that are at present not being absorbed. To do that, I pointed out what happened in China, but actually what also happened in Korea, what happened in other parts of the world. That process has not been completed in many other parts of the world that are actually, in some cases, quite close to Korea, but also, in some cases, more distant. And I talked about the way in which people are starting to envisage projects to sort of interconnect, right, these different national economies into a wider network. In part because, there are, if you like, potential markets, and the countries that have gone through a development experience have shown how you can, in a sense, create those markets, and through the creation of those markets, create the possibilities for growth. I pointed out how in China, half of the population has not yet been urbanized. So in China, that process can be completed. That process can be pushed forward in other parts of the world. I pointed out that in part, countries like Korea, if you like, to benefit from it, it depends upon the integration of Korea with other economies that are participating or engaging in this process. I pointed out that it depends on innovation, right? But these innovations, to some extent, should have different targets. I said that many of the innovations we have are really targeted at high-end markets. It's quite interesting that if you look at some of the Chinese innovations, they actually produce sort of medium quality products that are actually immediately targeted at mass markets. So there is considerable potential for investment of that kind, targeted at middle, low-income markets, or of people whose life is in the process of being transformed. And then I talked about the issues of sustainability of the environment. I pointed out how to resolve these problems, there are a very large number of possibilities for strategic investment. And that developing these products is another area for, sort of, if you like, strategic industrial policy. And once these products start to emerge, it's quite clear that there are potential markets for them, because in the years ahead, we're going to have to grapple with these problems of climate change, environmental degradation, air pollution, and so on. So, if you like, I was trying to identify opportunities for investment that would enable savings to be absorbed. And the comments that I made about my presentation about China are also very interesting because they reflect on recent changes in China's trajectory. I mean, the fiscal stimulus, you could say, was hugely successful, but of course it was associated with quite high levels of government debt, which is one of the reasons why the Chinese government now has been trying to place restrictions on borrowing by subnational government. But, I mean, there are potential ways of starting to absorb, if you like, Chinese savings without encouraging people to invest in stock markets that end up with massively overvalued stocks, with prices of stocks bearing no real relationship to underlying earnings capacity. So this stock market, it was a bubble. Many people were investing in the market, and the consequence was that prices were completely out of line with earnings. On the other hand, you could think about other targets for those savings. So, for example, there are moves now in the direction of launching more government bonds in order to fund government investment, public investment in the kind of infrastructure that is needed to create these compact and sustainable cities. So, I think there are messages are basically about demand, about the importance of demand, the importance of investment, about the fact that we live in a world in which there are not sufficient opportunities for profitable investment in advanced countries, in economically developed countries to absorb savings, and yet, if one can think about ways of generalizing, if you like, the formal experience of countries like East Asian economies, Tigers, Japan, China's recent experience, you can see that there are huge potential markets, and actually, developed countries participate in these processes of development, they're able to contribute by inventing the sorts of products that will enable the world to return to a more equal world.
다음으로 오브라이언
Thank you very much, and thanks for the questions, Professor Young. I think there's 6 points or questions you want me to focus on, so I'll be very brief with my remarks. First are related directly to my paper, and the question asked, the first question is, what are the advantages of the new approach to regional and local policy in the UK from RDA to LEP, and what are the disadvantages? I would say that the advantages of that particular policy, and it could have implications and potential issues for Korea, are it enables local development to focus on local economies, because the scale of that institution and that reach is more matched to travel to work areas. Regional development agencies in England, there were 9 of them. One argument is they were too big in terms of their geography, so they couldn't necessarily focus on more local or urban issues. And the second advantage is that with having local government playing a stronger role within these local enterprise partnerships or these LEPs. You have a body that's more accountable, local government is elected, the population, there's more transparency there, and there is a direct link to local communities and to what a local government does beyond local economic development. Within the LEPs, the private sector is very active, so each local enterprise partnership has a private sector chair, and each of those individuals run a business. So these aren't appointees, unlike the RDAs. These are people who have come from actually running businesses on a day-to-day basis, so they've got some experience, expertise, some knowledge about running companies and the challenges that companies face. I think it's also in the context of austerity, and that was my point, I think, and my thread through my paper, was it's about doing more with less. So there's more resources coming from central government into local regional development, and particularly to the LEPs. And these institutions, unlike the RDAs, are cheaper. They're cheaper in terms of their operating costs, they're cheaper in terms of the resources which are coming through to them. And that's one argument that the government has made and the supporters have made, that actually it's about taking tough choices, it's about prioritisation, it's about concentrating on a handful of things and doing those well, rather than maybe doing too much. In terms of the disadvantages of the LEP model, well, they've got limited capacity. You know, a handful of staff. In some cases, you're talking 2 or 3 people that work in a local development institution that is trying to compete for resources not only across the UK but worldwide. Limited expertise as well. A lot of expertise and resources has left the local and regional development scene within the UK over the past 5 years. These bodies are fairly institutionally weak on an international comparative basis. There's a grand experiment going on, someone told me from the OECD, about what's happening in terms of local regional development institutions in the UK. Fairly sort of unprecedented. They don't have any legal basis, they can't issue contracts, they can't hold money, they're informal, all manner of things related to that, and I refer to the European Commission's concerns with LEPs there. Fairly limited accountability. Not every LEP, for example, publishes its agenda and minutes on a website. So these bodies are taking decisions about millions of pounds worth of investment, but you wouldn't necessarily know how and where that decision is being made. On a personal note, I think that's quite problematic. There's also too many of them, 39. It's far too many. It just complicates coordination on cross-local sort of issues. So I think the issues for Korea would be potentially, you know, you're going to get a cheaper model than a regional institution looking at local and regional development. It could heighten inter-urban competition, but you know, where's the coordination of those issues that transcend the local area? I think that's really important, and the LEPs at times struggle to coordinate themselves. On the second question, I think the problem around sort of strategic industries and the work that the RDAs did, or the problem after the RDAs were abolished, so the work they did on science and industry clusters, on things like new technologies, electric vehicles, energy, nanotechnology, etc. And there was quite a lot of innovative work done by some RDAs. All of that after 2010 was centralised by the UK government. So as the RDAs were abolished, that particular industrial policy reverted back to London and to civil servants and their agencies. And so there is a limited spatial focus to that policy, and the LEPs have to compete for any resource relating to strategic industries. It's not given as a right that maybe the RDAs were able to have. Third question was around, I guess, northern initiatives, the Northern Way, and now the Northern Powerhouse. And again, the big question for the northeast of England is, how does it play into this agenda with other cities in the north of England? Has it got a distinctive offer to make to investors and to UK government and others to say that it can contribute to development across the north of England? Or is its geographical location such that it will always be problematic for it to suggest that it can be connected via transport and via labour markets to Manchester and other cities in the north of England? If so, does it have to kind of pursue its own kind of strategy around local regional development? At the moment, that's highly controversial and somewhat risky, so it's forming alliances with other cities in the north because it's concerned that if it's not part of that process, it will lose out to any resources that are coming its way from central government. I think the question was asked around how we attract and embed highly skilled sort of labour. Well, I agree with the remarks that have been made. It's around having effective knowledge-based industries that are providing that employment for high-skilled people. It's about an open, flexible migration policy. So in the UK, that's highly controversial at the moment from the business community. It's about quality of housing, of transport, a cultural, creative offer. Universities play an important role, and I think this is very interesting in the sense of whatever debate there is in UK universities about graduate fees and how graduates are having to borrow money to fund their way through university. What you're getting is universities, compared to local government, are quite wealthy, so they've got lots of revenue coming in compared to local and city government, so they can play a very active role in local and regional development, and so there is a interesting dynamic happening around that. So I think the institutional framework, universities are a clearly important part of that process. The question from a colleague from the audience, I absolutely agree with critiques of off-the-shelf kind of models and off-the-shelf kind of strategies, and there's countless examples of that around local and regional development policy. I think it's a question of what offer does the locality make, but at the same time recognising that all cities and all regions can't be the same thing to everyone. And the problem has been in the UK in the past that we've had regional regions and regional strategies wanting to do exactly the same thing and saying they're going to be world leaders in X, Y, and Z sort of technology. So it's about some sort of differentiation and some understanding and coordination amongst regions and localities. Whilst at the same time in the UK, I think recognising that there is a political economy kind of issue there about why certain places, having gone through deindustrialisation, are still dealing with the consequences of that compared to others. And the final question, I think, was from Professor Park about the demand-driven growth model. And yes, from what I was saying, what the UK government is pushing and promoting, it's infrastructure investment, and I think there's a number of reasons for that. I don't think our Finance Minister or Chancellor of the Exchequer would publicly say that he's following neo-Keynesian sort of economic models, but in effect he does see infrastructure investment as a means of somehow being seen to stimulate the economy. But he won't publicly, I suggest, sort of admit that. There is a politics of infrastructure that politicians do like to open new roads, new bridges, new metro lines, so it's been seen to do something to try and stimulate the economy. We do have an issue, I think, with how infrastructure investment is appraised and evaluated. So there's a very, very high sort of threshold set by certain government departments and officials on the ability of infrastructure to contribute to growth. So it's not infrastructure everywhere, it's about can you as a locality and city prove as best you can that this piece of infrastructure will add to your economic growth and that you can deliver it on time and to budget. Important, the delivery side of that, because too often there's been cases in the UK where national and local government hasn't delivered infrastructure to time and on budget. It's highly problematic. Final point I think that around the UK government perspective is the preference for private finance over public finance for infrastructure development, despite the evidence suggesting that the cost of capital for that private finance is much higher than public finance, direct public finance. And the National Audit Office, the body I mentioned in my presentation, has done a recent study on this, advocating that the government needs to look and think beyond perhaps costly public-private partnership initiatives and think about how it invests money for infrastructure directly itself, but that's a very political issue in the UK. Thank you.
예, 대단히 감사합니다. 삼타 교수님 답변 부탁드립니다.
たくさんの質問ありがとうございます。日本語で失礼します。
예, 많은 질문 감사합니다. 일본어로 지금부터 답변 드리도록 하겠습니다.
内発的発電の事例について
조금 저 인터벌 한 1분 정도 뒀다. 그래야 영어로 통역.
예, 内発的発展の事例についての質問がありましたので、いくつかお話ししたいと思いますが、そこで私が言いたいのはですね、内発的発展というのは非常に多様であるということです。
네, 또 자, 아까 내재적 발전에 대한 사례를 질문하셨는데 그 부분에 대해서 지금부터 몇 개 말씀을 드리도록 하겠습니다. 일본어로 내발적 발전이라고 그러죠. 내재적 발전을 하는 것이 이제 대량 양이 많으니까 지금부터 대응 방법도 다양하니까 그 부분을 좀 설명드리도록 하겠습니다.
まず農村の人材誘致の事例を挙げたいと思いますが、島根県の海士町という、人口2000人ぐらいの、島があります。Iターン人材が集中している島として有名なんですが、Iターンというのは都市で生まれて農村に住む、方ですね。働いている人の4分の1は Iターンの人だという、小さな離島です。
예, 먼저 농촌의 인재 유치에 대해서 설명을 드리도록 하겠습니다. 사마노현의 아이치 지역에 2,000명 정도 인구가 있는 도시인데 여기는 아이탄 인재라는 것이 이제 유명한데 이게 아이탄이라는 게 뭐냐면은 도시에서 태어나서 농촌으로 들어온 우리나라 지금 기촌 인구가 4분의 1 정도 되는 지역입니다.
都市の人材はですね、専門的能力を持っていますが、その専門的能力を生かす仕事の場が農村にはないので、なかなか帰ってこれないということがありますので、海士町の場合は仕事の場はですね、もう企業、事業を起こしてもらうと、その帰ってきてもらった人に事業を起こしてもらうという方針で、帰ってきた人が東京よりも、自分の自己実現に理解力のある、コミュニティに非常に希望を見出して、給料が半分になっても人材誘致に成功したという事例です。
네, 이 아마치라는 곳에서는 도시에서 태어난 인재들이 가지고 있는 능력이라는 것은 전문적인 능력, 탁월한 능력을 가지고 있지만 사실상 시골에서는 사용할 수 없는 능력입니다. 그래서 시골로 돌아오지 않는데 이 아마초라는 곳에서는 그 사람들이 기업을 할 수 있도록 하는 방침을 세워서 동경보다 월급은 작지만 자기 실현을 할 수 있도록 함으로 해서 성공한 사례입니다.
この場合の決め手はですね、農村のコミュニティが閉鎖的で足の引っ張り合いではなくて、オープンで支援型になるように、行政中心に非常にコミュニティの改革を進めたというのがポイントです。
여기서 최대 포인트는 농촌의 커뮤니티가 폐쇄적이지 않고 오픈되어 있어서 도시에서 온 사람들이 쉽게 적용할 수 있도록 개혁을 한 것이 포인트라고 보여집니다.
次に中規模都市の事例として、北陸の金沢と富山を、取り上げますが、
네, 그 다음으로 좀 중규모로 카나자와와 토야마에 대한 사례를 말씀드리겠습니다.
金沢は都市の中の産業連関が非常に進んでいてですね、異業種が出会って新しい分野を応用技術で開拓していくというのが得意です。
네, 카나자와는 다른 업종들이 합쳐서 새로운 응용 분야를 만드는 게 탁월한 지역입니다.
お隣の富山という町はすぐ近くにあるんですが、産業連関はとても得意ではなくてですね、その代わりに、地元の企業が共同出資し合ってですね、新しい分野の企業を起こす。その時には外からも企業を連れてきて、そこから技術を取り入れて共同出資で新しい事業を起こすというパターンが得意です。
바로 옆에 있는 토야마라는 지역은 이러한 산업연계 부분은 잘 되지 않지만 그 지역에 있는 기업들이 공동 출자를 통해서 새로운 분야에 진출하고 그것을 위해서 외부에 있는 기업들을 받아들이고 그 부분이 잘 되고 있는 지역입니다.
大都市の例でいうと地方なんですけれども100万人都市の京都という町がありますけれども、京都は文化だけでなくてですね、大学研究機関での最先端研究を、事業化する企業に起こすというパターンが昔から得意です。
그리고 대도시 사례로는 인구 100만 명의 교토 지역이 있습니다. 교토 지역은 문화뿐만 아니라 대학과 연구기관들이 활발하여 그러한 첨단 연구를 사업화하는 데 특화된 곳입니다.
こういうふうに地域ごとにですね、その事業を内発的に起こしていくパターンというのも、その地域の歴史や文化や社会のコミュニティによってですね、非常に多様であって、確一的な方法では内発的発展はできないと考えています。
네, 금방 말씀드린 것과 같이 지역별로 사업을 내생적으로 발전시키는 것은 여러 가지 다양한 방법이 있기 때문에 이것을 한마디로 설명하기는 좀 힘들다고 보여집니다.
なので内発的発展をやろうと思うとですね、国家主導では無理というのが私の意見です。地域主導でないとできない。国家がいろいろと取り組みを今地方創生でもやっています。人材誘致のやり方なんかもいろいろあるんですが、非常に画一的です。
네, 지금 말씀드린 것과 같은 다양성이 있기 때문에 이러한 내생적 발전은 국가 주도로는 무리라고 저는 말씀드리고 싶습니다. 따라서 내생적 발전은 지역 주도로서 이루어지는 것이 바람직하며 지금 국가가 인재 육성이라든가 다양하게 하고 있지만 한계가 있습니다.
地方創生でやられているのはですね、例えば大都市の高齢者を、地方で、ケアの拠点を作ってそこに移住してもらうという政策であるとか、地方の大学にですね、その大学の卒業生の、何割かを地元就職させなさいという目標値を与える政策であるとか、こういったものは非常に画一的な方法でですね、地域の本当にニーズに合っているのかどうかわからないのでですね、なかなかうまくいかないと私は見ています。
지방 창생에 대해서 말씀드릴 때 대도시의 고령자를 지방으로 이전시키거나 지방대학 졸업생을 몇 %는 반드시 그 지역의 기업에 취업시키라는 목표를 설정하고 국가에서 하고 있지만 실질적으로 그 지역에서 그게 니즈가 있는 것인지 불명확하다고 저는 보고 있습니다.
これに対して国家のその、地域間の調整のための、政策として大事になってくるのは 画一的なアプローチよりも、地域主導で、取り組みができるようにですね、さまざまな地域の事例を、整理して情報供給、するであるとか、あるいはどうしてもうまくいかない地域に、アドバイザーとかですね、コーディネーターみたいな人材を、つけるとかですね、そういうやり方で、その地域の格差是正を図るような方向性が、これからは考えられるだろうと思っています。
따라서 국가가 지역 간의 조정을 하기 위해서는 국가가 직접 주도하는 것보다 지역이 주도로 할 수 있도록 이러한 사례들을 정리를 해서 정보를 공유하거나 그리고 실질적으로 지역 주도로 잘 안 되는 지역에는 중앙에서 잘 될 수 있는 코디네이터라든가 지원자 인력을 배치를 해서 지역 간의 격차를 없애는 것이 국가의 할 일이라고 보여집니다.
もう一つ、内発的発展と、需要サイトのアプローチに関する質問がありましたけれども、内発的発展は基本的には供給サイドのアプローチだと考えています。新しい、事業をですね、地域の資源、地域の人材をベースにして、事業を実現していくという、プロセスを自分たちでやっていく、これは供給サイドのアプローチであると考えています。
네, 그리고 아까 프로에서 나온 질문인데 내생적 발전과 그리고 수요 측면에서 접근 그 두 개 말씀하신 게 같지 않나고 하셨는데 내생적 발전은 제가 생각하기로는 기본적으로 공급적인 측면에서 접근하고 있는 것으로 보여집니다.
これに対して、需要の問題はですね、グローバルな問題になってきていると思います。過剰供給、需要不足の構造で非常に不安定という資本主義の構造は今やグローバルな問題であります。
네, 그리고 수요 문제에 대해서는 글로벌화되어 있는 문제로서 과잉 공급 그리고 수요 부족이라는 세계적인 문제가 되어 있다고 생각합니다.
これに内発的発展で解決できるとはなかなか考えられないんですけれども、一応内発的発展はですね、その供給サイドのアプローチなんだけれども、それを地域のニーズとですね、地域のシーズを結びつけて新たに事業を起こすといった方法はですね、需要と供給をすでに地域内で一致させているという特徴があります。
이런 문제를 내생적 발전에서 해결을 할 수 있다고는 저는 생각하지 않습니다. 내생적 발전이 공급 측면에서 접근을 하고 있지만 이러한 수요 공급은 지역 내에서 균형을 이루어갈 수 있는 접근이기 때문입니다.
これは問題を根本的に解決するわけではないけれども、問題の緩和にはなると思っていまして、今地方創生の政策なんかでも地域の産業連関構造を分析し、よくあるパターンなんですけれども、地域の農林水産業はあるんだけども地域の宿泊業なんかにはその地元の産物は使われていないとかですね、こういう連関していないところを、データで明らかにして、そこを新しい事業作りでですね、地域のアクターがその事業作りに、取り組んでいくみたいなことが今取り組まれているところです。
이것이 근본적인 해결책은 아니겠지만 지역별 산업끼리 연관이 없는 그런 부분들을 새로 묶어서 새로운 기업을 만드는 정책들이 지금 일본에서 검토되고 있습니다. 네, 이상입니다.
자, 시간이 아주 많이 됐습니다. 그래도 혹시 발표자 중에서 오늘 이야기 못 들으면 또 못 들으실 가능성이 있으니까 발표자 중에서 꼭 좀 전에 토론한 내용 중에서 제가 좀 코멘트를 더 했으면 좋겠다 하는 이야기가 남으신 분이 있으면은 단 한 분 정도 추가로 말씀을 해 주시었으면 감사하겠습니다. 없으면은 안 해도 좋습니다. 시간이 아주 많이 됐습니다. 예. 시간이 지금 원래 50분에 끝나기로 했는데 20분이 지나서 그래도 질문 받겠습니다. 질문 받는데 짧게. 예, 그리고 답변하는 분도 짧게 답변 부탁드립니다.
피터 오브리언 교수님께 질문을 좀 드리겠습니다. 148쪽을 보면 시티딜의 그 도시 사례로 이제 맨체스터가 시티딜의 가장 큰 수혜자로 이제 나와 있는데요. 결국은 정부 보조금 지원이 투기적 경향으로 나타났다고 하면서도 이게 지역 간 불균형으로 가고 지역 간 불균형 심화는 결국 다른 도시들이 새로운 투자처를 찾기 위해서 압박을 받는다고 했는데, 그리고 그건 도시 인프라 투자를 자극하는 것으로 가는 것인지, 그렇다고 하면 아까 말씀하실 때 민간 조달 방식이 최근 들어서 더 커졌다고 하는데, 그 민간 조달 자본들은 결국 도시 인프라 투자, 그러니까 도시 인프라 투자를 위해 민간 자본이 조달되는 그 자본은 과잉 축적된 자본이 혹시 아닌지, 그거에 대한 질문을 드리겠습니다.
Thank you for the question. The graph that you see in the paper is UK government funding. However, as well as UK government funding, there is private finance which is also going towards infrastructure in places like Manchester. So what the UK government has said is, we will give you resource if you can commit to matching that with private finance, to lever in additional private finance to create a much bigger pot for development, for capital investment. So Manchester has been able to do that because it has, well, two things. One, it has the confidence of the private investor community that as a model they have worked together for a number of years as a metropolitan region. So they've been able to deliver infrastructure projects on time, to budget, in fact in advance of time on a number of occasions. So there is investor confidence that if they invest in Manchester they will get a return on that investment and projects will be delivered. So that's important. Where Manchester is also trying to attract new investment is through sovereign wealth funding. So through Chinese sovereign wealth funding, Islamic finance as well. So the ability to try and bring in funding from Qatar, for example. There is a big housing development taking place in Manchester which is being financed by sovereign wealth fund from Qatar. So there's a lot of private money going into places, but not all places. It's going into places such as Manchester or London that are able to demonstrate that they can deliver a return on that investment, but also they've got public money underwriting that kind of private sort of finance as well. So London, for example, is able to attract lots of private investment, but at the same time it also is able to get lots of government funding as well to underwrite or support infrastructure development. Does that answer your question?